Thanks for being here. Merci d'être ici. I want to chat about, first off, COP21 and some of our priorities. I'll be attending, and I want folks to know that you can count on New Democrats to fight to see real concrete action, that Canada is doing its part. And we're going to focus on three things in particular that we want to see from Justin Trudeau and from the Liberal government. First off, we want to see bolder ambitions to reduce emissions. We need to have higher targets. We campaigned on at least 50% reductions in emissions, and we want to see this Liberal government get as close as possible to 50%. They put out a target that's below 50%. We want to push them as high as possible. In the States, President Biden is doing 50%. That's their commitment. They're coming to COP with that commitment. We want to see Canada as close as possible to 50 or even higher. But 50 is what we're hoping for, and we're going to try to push the Liberals to be as high as possible. They've given a range of 40 to 45. We'd like to see them at the higher end of that. We also want to see a real commitment to ending fossil fuel subsidies. The federal government should not be subsidizing new oil and gas. What the federal government should be using and incentivizing with federal resources is to invest in sustainable energy and sustainable sources of energy, renewable energy. That's where we should be using our federal resources, and we should be incentivizing. And so we're going to, again, push hard to make sure there are some clear commitments to end fossil fuel subsidies and to instead incentivize renewable energy. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we cannot fight climate crisis by leaving thousands of workers behind. So there has to be a clear plan to invest in creating good jobs for workers, to make sure workers are not left behind, to give them a clear path. What is it going to look like for them and their families and their futures? We want to make sure that in our commitment to fight this climate crisis, we bring everyone along. We will not be able to move forward if the workers who are right now worried about their future are not included in the plan. And so that's something that's very important to us. And I want workers to know that while everyone believes strongly that we need to have real action on fighting the climate crisis, New Democrats also believe we cannot leave workers behind. And we are committed to making sure there's a clear path that ensures a bright future for all workers. We know that this is one of the most urgent crises of our time, and I'm intending to convey our commitment as a party, my personal commitment to fighting the climate crisis, but also doing our part to ensure that the Liberals deliver on real action. Donc, je veux commencer aujourd'hui en parlant de COP21. Pour moi et pour nous comme parti, c'est vraiment important d'être là. Donc, ça, c'est pourquoi je vais assister à cette conférence. Et nos priorités pour cette conférence, c'est trois choses, effectivement. On veut pousser le gouvernement libéral et Justin Trudeau d'avoir des cibles plus audacieuses pour réduire nos émissions. Notre cible, c'est au moins 50% de réduction des émissions. Donc, on va essayer de mettre la pression sur le gouvernement libéral, sur Justin Trudeau, d'augmenter notre cible nationale pour réduire les émissions. Ils ont parlé de 40-45%. On veut voir aussi, autant que possible, presque 50%. Donc, on va pousser ce gouvernement. Deuxièmement, on va continuer de dire clairement qu'on doit éliminer les subventions aux pétrolières. Le Premier ministre Justin Trudeau a promis d'éliminer ces subventions, mais au lieu de les éliminer, il les a augmentées. Donc, ce qu'on va voir, c'est une élimination de ces subventions. Au lieu de subventionner les secteurs pétroliers, ce qu'on veut voir, c'est une subvention pour investir dans l'énergie renouvelable. Et c'est essentiel qu'on fait ça. Et finalement, dans notre avis, ce n'est pas possible de faire face à la crise climatique en laissant à côté les travailleurs et travailleuses. Donc, on veut voir un plan concret pour investir dans les emplois et pour donner des garanties aux travailleurs et travailleuses que vous ne serez pas laissés à côté. Donc, dans notre avis, on comprend l'urgence de faire face à la crise climatique, mais on croit profondément qu'on ne peut pas faire face à cette crise sans avoir un plan pour les travailleurs. Donc, ce sont les trois enjeux, les trois priorités pour nous. I also want to again remind folks that there is a deadline coming up. The Liberal government has a deadline of this Friday. The Justin Trudeau has a deadline of this Friday to decide whether or not he's going to continue to fight Indigenous kids in court. We again want to make it very clear. Justin Trudeau needs to stop the legal action against Indigenous kids, comply with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal order, and work towards justice for Indigenous people. Donc, finalement, je vais ajouter qu'on a un deadline ce vendredi et c'est important pour ce gouvernement de décider s'ils vont continuer la poursuite contre les enfants autochtones ou non. On a dit à plusieurs reprises que ce gouvernement doit arrêter de poursuivre les enfants autochtones dans les cours et on va continuer d'exiger le gouvernement d'arrêter de faire ça tout de suite. Merci, and with that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Well, I'll take questions, starting with questions on the phone, alternating with questions in the room. One question, one follow-up per reporters. Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions, en commençant par les questions au téléphone, en alternance avec des questions dans la salle. Une question suivie par journaliste. Opérateur, avons-nous une première question?
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question, please press star 1 on the device's keypad. Si vous avez une question, faites étoile 1 sur votre appareil. The first question is from David Thurton from CBC News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hey, Mr. Singh. Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask you about the announcement, the news today that Pope Francis will be coming to Canada. I want to know what your reaction to that is. And also, do you have any concerns about who's going to be on the hook to pay for this? Because these trips, papal visits, very expensive. They attract a lot of crowds. They require a lot of security, a lot of on-site setup and stuff like that, the big mass, that kind of thing. So it'd be good to get your thoughts about that too.
Certainly. Thanks for the question. First of all, we don't know what is exactly going to happen with the visit, but I want to make it clear that we expect that the Pope should apologize for the wrongs committed by the Catholic Church against Indigenous people, particularly in residential schools. So we expect an apology, but an apology is not good enough. The Catholic Church also is responsible for compensation and should provide that compensation to survivors of Indigenous residential schools. And finally, we also know there's many documents that the Catholic Church has still not provided to give closure to families so they can know what happened to their children. That's another element that we expect to see. And it's also important, it ties in very well to the deadline on Friday. The court case right now that the Liberal government's fighting, that Justin Trudeau is fighting, is effectively fighting the survivors, the children of these survivors of residential schools. So these kids are the survivors, children, and they're facing discrimination, and this Liberal government is fighting them in court. So it's an ongoing legacy, and they need to end the legacy. They need to stop fighting these kids in court and comply with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal and deliver justice.
And what are your thoughts about, the cost of these trips? Because
right,
it is important, it is meaningful, it's been called for, but there is a significant budget attached to it. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, we've got an interest, of course, in making sure that events that happen are safe and that we use our resources to make sure that events are secure, and we should always do our part to make sure that these type of events are safe and secure. And in terms of cost or cost sharing, that's an interesting reflection, something that we can definitely take a look at. Is there a way for visiting parties to contribute in terms of their security and in terms of the preparation they need to do to make sure the events are safe and secure?
Well, now I'll take a question in the room. Kevin?
Morning, Mr. Singh. Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. I just want, from yesterday's cabinet announcement, and today you're talking about having better commitments or stronger commitments up to 50% of emission reductions at COP. Where do you see the NDP in a minority parliament being able to pressure? So you're going to this summit. Is there pressure that you plan to apply to the Liberal government, and what you're maybe going to say to people at this summit. Where's the strategy within a minority parliament for the NDP to perhaps encourage or in some ways force the Liberals to take a stronger or higher climate goal, let's say?
I appreciate the question. In my first conversation with the Prime Minister on the phone after the election and before COP, we chatted and I said, if the Liberal government wants to work with New Democrats, if Justin Trudeau wants to work with us, and of course in a minority government he's going to need to, I laid out three things that would give us an indication of the government's desire to work together. And the three things that I said I'd like to see that would let us know if there's an interest in working together, that would make it easier for us to work together, were one, action on the climate crisis, and COP21 fast approaching was one clear opportunity to see that action. And I've laid out what I'd like to see. The second thing I said is I want to see this government drop the case against Indigenous kids, stop fighting them in court. And the third thing is I wanted to see pandemic supports continue. Well, on the pandemic supports, they've cut them immediately. And that was the wrong thing to do. And again, it sent a message to us that they're not interested in working on that file, and that would make it harder for us to work together. There's still two remaining. And I want to make it clear, COP is fast approaching, and we want to see these firm commitments to fighting the climate crisis, bolder targets, and that's what we're expecting. And with the fast approaching deadline, this is another example of what would show to us an interest in working together. And if they continue to fight kids in court, it would show to us they're not interested in working together. And so these are really important decisions that Justin Trudeau is going to have to make in the days that follow. And we're going to watch closely to see, are they signaling to us a desire to work together or not? And that will inform our relationship moving forward. And so we're going to apply a lot of pressure that we want to see real action on the climate crisis. People demand it. We just went through an election. We heard from so many people that are desperate to see us do our part to fight this crisis. And we want to see a real action on the part of Justin Trudeau.
Would you trigger a vote of non-confidence if some of those essentially demands of the government are met?
What I've said about non-confidence is that the Liberal government and Justin Trudeau shouldn't take our support for granted. They shouldn't take our support on any vote for granted. That being said, our goal is to work together. And I've been really clear on this, even in the previous minority government. Our goal is to find ways to make Parliament work for people. We respect the Parliament chosen by Canadians, and we respect that they want us to work together. That is our goal. That is what we want to do. But our support will not be taken for granted. We will work together on things that we agree on, and we are prepared to work together on things that will help make Canadians' lives better. If they're planning to hurt Canadians or bring in something that's going to make life harder, they can go to the Conservatives. If they want to make life better for Canadians, we are ready. We want to work together, and we want to make Parliament work.
And we're now going back to the phone. Opérateur, avons-nous une prochaine question au téléphone?
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Juliane Lapointe, Radio-Canada. À vous.
Bonjour, M. Singh. J'aimerais
Bonjour.
vous entendre en français sur le fait que le pape va venir au Canada dans le contexte de la réconciliation avec les peuples autochtones. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez de tout ça?
Oui, donc premièrement, on entend, ce n'était pas clair à ce moment, ils n'ont pas annoncé s'ils vont faire ça ou non, mais on veut voir une excuse au part du pape pour ce qui s'est passé dans les pensionnats autochtones. Donc ça, c'est important, une excuse. Deuxièmement, compensation. C'est clair que l'Église était responsable pour les conditions horribles. Donc, pour les survivants et survivantes, l'Église doit compenser les survivants et survivantes. Et finalement, il y a des documents qui restent toujours avec l'Église catholique. Et ils ont la responsabilité de livrer ces documents, de partager ces documents pour les familles, les familles autochtones, pour qu'ils puissent avoir la connaissance de ce qui s'est passé avec leurs enfants. Donc, ce sont les trois choses qu'on veut voir. Donc, une excuse, c'est minimum, mais ce n'est pas suffisant. On veut voir aussi les deux autres éléments.
Autre question. Aux dernières élections, ça a pris 44 jours avant que les députés reviennent au Parlement. Cette fois-ci, on parle de 62 jours entre les élections puis le retour au Parlement. Qu'est-ce que ça vous inspire? Pourquoi? Ça vous inspire le fait que ce soit aussi long comme ça?
Pour moi, ça soulève la question de pourquoi M. Trudeau a déclenché les élections. Il a dit que on est dans un moment urgent, un moment important d'entendre la volonté de la population canadienne, d'entendre leurs besoins et puis répondre. Mais si c'était une question urgente, pourquoi elle a pris assez de temps autant de temps pour retourner au Parlement? Donc, pour moi, ça soulève encore euh, le fait qu'on aurait dû avoir cette élection et c'était une mauvaise décision. Et c'était seulement pour chercher plus de pouvoir au lieu de vraiment aider les gens. Et c'est un autre exemple avec le délai de retourner au travail.
And back to the room.
Hello, Mr. Singh.
Hi there.
Hi, Mina Karim-Wilms, the Globe and Mail. I know you've spoken about this before, but I do want to clarify again about vaccination in the House of Commons. How do you think this session of Parliament should be held? You've said before it should be a hybrid model, but if all parties do confirm that their MPs are vaccinated, do you think that everyone should be in person in the House of Commons?
So that's correct. I do believe that everyone should be vaccinated, of course. I think it's important that we show leadership at this political level, at the federal level. We show leadership to Canadians. We're asking Canadians are being asked in different provinces to show their proof of vaccination to dine in and to go to different indoor events and activities. At a minimum, federal elected officials should have to do the same thing. The fact that Conservatives are debating this really shows that the official opposition is more interested in elitism about not being vaccinated and focusing on themselves and internal divisions rather than being there for people and fighting for people. And that really speaks about the Conservatives' lack of focus on people and their self-interest and just being focused on themselves. In terms of the Parliament, I think the hybrid Parliament has opened up a door to more participation, and it allows for families or for members of Parliament with maybe young families, people that have other obligations to be able to participate and still be able to fulfill those obligations. And so I think it's opened up a new opportunity, and I want to see it continue. There's also some potential benefits given that we're still in a pandemic, where the flexibility of having hybrid parliaments will help. In the case of Alberta and Saskatchewan right now are going through some of the worst in terms of impacts of the COVID-19. They're going through the worst stage right now than any other time in the 18 months of the pandemic. So there's good reason to allow for flexibility for people to stay at home and not have to be in Ottawa and not have to travel to Ottawa. Oui, donc oui, on appuie l'idée d'être vacciné, évidemment. On est pour la vaccination. Et je pense que ce débat soulève comment l'opposition officielle, les conservateurs, sont plus intéressés de parler de leur propre intérêt au lieu de parler de ce qui se passe dans la vie des gens. Ils sont égoïstes ou illis parce qu'ils concentrent leurs efforts pour les divisions internes au lieu de parler de ce qui se passe dans les vies des gens, comment on peut aider les gens. Et c'est dommage parce que ce qu'on doit faire maintenant, c'est de répondre aux besoins des gens, de répondre à leurs besoins et de trouver des solutions pour mettre fin à cette pandémie et pour aller de l'avant. Donc, je pense que c'est une critique pour le Parti conservateur et leur mauvaise priorité. Mais finalement, la question de parlement hybride, je suis pour un parlement hybride parce que c'est un outil qui montre qu'on peut fonctionner dans une manière où les députés qui ont des obligations familiales peuvent rester chez eux et puis aussi participer dans le Parlement et représenter leur comté. Donc, je pense que c'est une bonne chose. C'est un outil qui donne la flexibilité et aussi dans une pandémie où on a toujours un impact fort et un impact qui frappe fort, particulièrement en Alberta et en Saskatchewan. Ça donne une flexibilité pour les députés de rester chez eux s'ils doivent Et pour moi, je pense que c'est vraiment une bonne chose de continuer. Peut-être après la pandémie aussi, c'est un outil qui donne de la flexibilité pour plus de participation dans le Parlement.
Just as a follow-up, just to clarify then, so do you think, just as many other workplaces may be doing across the country, that this should maybe, the hybrid model could be a new standard going forward, even past the pandemic for the House of Commons?
Yeah, actually, I just said that in French. Actually, funny enough. Yeah, I think it is something for us to consider. I think the flexibility that it provides, even outside of a pandemic scenario, if we want to participate, if we want to encourage younger MPs, MPs with families, women to participate in politics, we can't just say, okay, participate without doing something to make it more welcoming or easier or more conducive, more accessible. And having a hybrid parliament, I think, is a tool that we've just gone through that works and would encourage more participation, would help maybe a young family that's deciding whether or not they want to enter into politics to make that decision. And I think it's better for Canada to have more participation from people that would otherwise feel like they couldn't do this. And I think it's a good tool that will encourage more folks to get involved in politics and encourage more folks to represent their communities.
Opérateur, avons-nous une question au téléphone?
Yes. Oui, thank you. Merci. The next question is from Cormac McSweeney from City News. Your line is open.
Hi, Mr. Singh. I want to start off with the potential papal visit. The Vatican, in its statement, did not commit to an apology. I know it's something that you and the Prime Minister and Indigenous leaders across the country have been demanding from the Pope. So what's your reaction to the fact that they're still not committing to this yet in announcing their willingness for the Pope to take this? Is it a bad sign that we're not getting this commitment yet from the Vatican?
So I think it's important to reiterate, as you just did, there is no commitment right now from the Pope to apologize. And so we are going to continue to demand that there is an apology. There is no question that the Catholic Church is responsible for some of the horrible and horrific things that happen in residential schools, and they should apologize. That is very important. And many people are demanding it, as you said. Indigenous leaders, survivors, and leaders in communities have said this has to happen. So we want to add our voice to that demand for an apology. But we also know that that's not enough. The Catholic Church has to also provide documents that they have in their possession so that families can get a sense of closure in terms of what happened to their children. And finally, compensation is a real question. The Catholic Church is also responsible and should also compensate. And so that's another factor, and I want to see that. But I want to highlight that the survivors of these residential schools, the next generation, the survivors had children. And that current generation, the children of survivors of residential schools, were discriminated and continue to be discriminated by Indigenous Child Welfare Services, by the Canadian government. They were found to have discriminated these children by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. And this government is fighting these kids in court. And there's a deadline this Friday. And again, I want to make it clear. While we want the church to apologize and we want them to compensate and we want them to disclose documents, we also need the Canadian government to stop fighting the next generation of kids in court. So stop the legal battles, stop fighting these kids in court, and actually deliver justice.
And my follow-up is on COP26. I'm hoping for a little bit of clarity here from your opening remarks on this. You said you want to see a target of 50% by 2030 GHG reductions from 2005 levels, but you'd be happy to see if it's closer to 40 to 45%. However, the 40 to 45% is already the government's target. They announced that in the spring that their target is 40 to 45%. So can you clarify exactly what you're calling for here, and why would you settle for a lesser target when you just went through a campaign saying we need to see 50%?
Oh, we absolutely want to see 50%. President Biden is committing to 50%. To me, it's a lack of leadership to not even match the level of the United States. We should be doing 50% without a doubt. The Liberals put out a range. If they're putting out a range, they should be at the higher end of that range. But we want to make it clear. Our goal is 50%. We campaigned on it. We believe that Canada should do at least that, 50%. That is the right thing to do. And we're going to continue to push for that. But the Liberals, when they put out a range, well, they might do 40 then. Well, our goal is to push them to go as high as possible, to be as bold as possible to fight this climate crisis. And so we're going to use our position. I'm using my position to say we need to do more, and Canada needs to do more, and Justin Trudeau needs to do more. But not just having higher targets. We've seen this government have target and then miss them. So not only do we want to see higher targets, we also want to see a plan to achieve those targets. A target without a plan is also meaningless. So we want to see a clear plan as well that lays out how they're going to achieve this target. So we're going to push them higher, and we want to see a clear plan.
And the last question will be in the room. Fraser?
Yes, morning. Fraser from APTN National News. So just back to the Papal visit. Sorry, I know you want to talk about COP. That's okay. Everyone's asking about the Papal. But as you know, what the Catholic Church should do and what they actually do are two very different things. And, there's no sense that as it stands now, when the Pope does come, that he will use that opportunity as anything about records or doing an apology or that. So, he's going to be a visitor here on Canadian soil, and the government will obviously be paying some of the costs of the, for the visit and that. What should they do to, set the agenda to make sure that some of these things happen? Because as it stands now, none of this will happen.
I think your question is really important because, again, it reiterates that right now there is no apology on the agenda. They've talked about vaguely helping with reconciliation, but there's no apology. What we expect the federal government to do is what we're doing, to demand that apology, to push for that apology, and to push for the release of documents, and to push for compensation. All three need to happen.
And just as a follow-up, again, they need to happen, they should happen, but they're not happening. And the government has really not required the Catholic Church to do anything. Are they, they read these things, they know what reconciliation is, say they're committed to it, but at the end of the day, they required the Catholic Church to do absolutely nothing. Or, that recent court case, you saw that it's not appealed. The millions of dollars that was supposed to go to residential school survivors actually went to a whole bunch of other areas, and nobody said anything. So I guess what is really going on here? The Catholic Church is a powerful institution. Is the government afraid of taking on this institution and pushing forward reconciliation?
Whether or not the Prime Minister is afraid is a question you should certainly ask the Prime Minister. But I think another factor that works into this is that the Canada right now, Justin Trudeau is not really in a good position to demand much from the Canadian government or from the Catholic Church when he is fighting kids in court. And I think that also factors into it. How can, on one hand, Justin Trudeau demand an apology when he is fighting the survivors of Indigenous kids, their next generation, the kids of those survivors, are now being fought by this Liberal government in court? How do you have the moral authority to say, okay, well, you've got to apologize, but I can fight the kids in court? I mean, that probably factors in as well. The Liberal government has to stop this legal battle. They've got a responsibility. They've got to stop fighting these kids in court, acknowledge the reckless and willful discrimination of these kids, and that it's ongoing, and commit to fixing it and compensating the kids. I think that's definitely a part of this dilemma that we're in right now, because we've got a government that on one hand talks about reconciliation but doesn't walk the path. And they're not in a position then to demand action from other parties when they themselves aren't doing what's necessary.
And I was told we have time for one last question. Kevin?
Is it because it's Kevin?
Sure, why not? Listen, I just wanted to take a step towards the vaccine mandate stuff that the Conservatives across the street are talking about right now. But a big part of their argument that I heard this morning was, that they want more the freedom of choice and the right to privacy to be respected. Do you think that vaccine mandates, like the one that will be imposed on MPs at the House of Commons, violate those principles of a freedom of choice and a right to privacy?
It's an interesting thing. So the Conservatives are in provinces where if you want to go in to dine in, you're going to have to show proof of vaccination. So they somehow think that they deserve to be treated differently than someone in Ontario right now that needs to go in, that wants to dine in, has got to show proof that they're vaccinated. If you want to go into a movie theater, you got to show proof that you're vaccinated. So somehow the Conservatives, the official opposition of Canada, thinks they deserve to be treated differently than everyday Canadians. Pretty elite of them and pretty disconnected from reality. We should be showing leadership in getting vaccinated. Getting vaccinated is safe. It's important. It helps keep people safe. We've got lots of evidence that when you're vaccinated, you're far less likely to get seriously ill from the virus. So the fact that they're focused on this, while we've got Alberta and Saskatchewan struggling right now under the weight of the pandemic, and healthcare workers that are at their wits' end, that are at their limits. We've got people that are worried about what's going to happen in the future. We've got workers that want to see investments to make sure we get out of this pandemic. We've got lots of things going on, and they're focused on themselves and whether or not they should be treated differently than everyone else in Canada. I think it's a sorry example of their completely failed priorities that are not connected with what people are going through.
What do you think should happen to MPs who decide not to get vaccinated? You know, they don't have medical exemptions. Their choice is not to be vaccinated. What do you think should happen? You know, what can the House of Commons do? I guess is a whole other question. But you know, would you want them to come? Would they be able to come here with testing? You know, would you want them just to be at a hybrid format only? Like, do you think that there should be an actual consequence for MPs who say, no, I've decided I'm not getting vaccinated because that's my choice?
Well, I think, you know, in Canada, people have the choice at the end of the day not to get vaccinated, but then they can't go into a restaurant. They can't go into a movie theater. They can't go into a place where they're going to risk infecting other people. So we've got MPs that we know if you're unvaccinated, you're at higher risk of infecting people around you. They would rather risk infecting staff, reporters, media, people that are nonpartisan, that don't work in a particular party, that work in the House of Commons, the security, all the staff. They'd rather risk increasing exposure to them than taking a precaution to stay safe. I think they shouldn't be able to put people's lives at risk or put their health at risk. I think they shouldn't be able to do that. They have a choice, but then they shouldn't be putting other people's families and themselves in a health risk. That should not be allowed.
This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Thank you very much.